So here's the thing about the Galactic Naval Academy. It's basically the universe's most expensive, most pretentious finishing school for alien species who think they're hot stuff. And they do think they're hot stuff. We're talking 300 years of tradition, honor codes written in 17 different languages, and an admissions process that makes Harvard look like a drive-through diploma mill. Me? I'm Jake Morrison. First human cadet in the Academy's illustrious history. Yeah, humanity finally got our invitation to the big kids' table, and somehow I ended up being the guy who had to sit there. Lucky me. The Academy sits on a planetoid called Apex Prime, which is exactly the kind of name you'd expect from a place this far up its own backside. Floating spires, crystalline walkways, buildings that literally glow with what I can only assume is concentrated smugness. My orientation packet, which was about 400 pages long, spent at least half that space explaining why I should feel honored to breathe the same recycled air as everyone else here. I showed up with a duffel bag and a Rolling Stones t-shirt. That went over about as well as you'd think. My assigned orientation guide was a Peltharian named Vexthor, who looked like someone had given a rhinoceros anger management issues and military training. He stared at my shirt for a full minute before asking if humans always advertised geological formations on their clothing. I tried to explain rock music. That somehow made it worse. But the real centerpiece of the Academy, the crown jewel of their insufferable pride, was something called the Impossibility Chamber. During the tour, Vexthor's voice dropped to a reverent whisper when we passed it. And I mean actually passed it, because first years weren't allowed within 50 feet of the thing. The chamber sat in the center of the oldest building on campus, behind energy barriers and what I'm pretty sure were velvet ropes. Velvet ropes, in space, for a puzzle. According to Vexthor, who was reading from the tour script like it was sacred text, the Impossibility Chamber contained a riddle that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for 3 centuries. Mathematicians, philosophers, quantum physicists, psychic monks, you name it. All of them had tried. All of them had failed. The chamber had become a legend, a testament to the limits of mortal understanding. I popped my gum. So it's like a really hard Rubik's Cube? Vexthor looked at me like I'd just insulted his mother. The comparison is offensive to the complexity of the challenge. Right, my bad, super serious puzzle, got it. What I didn't mention was that the whole setup reeked of that thing humans do, where we make something harder than it needs to be just to feel smart about it. But I was trying to make a good first impression. Well, a better impression than the t-shirt anyway. The instructors at the Academy were a mixed bag of alien species, all united by their shared belief that they knew everything and I knew nothing. The head of cadet training was Commander Thulron, a xiphoid who looked like a praying mantis had gone to law school and decided to make that everyone else's problem. His compound eyes had this way of looking at you that suggested he was simultaneously judging your present, past, and potential future failures. Cadet Morrison, he'd said during our first meeting, his mandibles clicking with what I assumed was distaste. Humanity's inclusion in this academy is conditional. You are here on probation, as your species has yet to prove it possesses the mental sophistication required for advanced galactic society. I'd nodded politely while thinking about nachos. It was going to be a long 4 years. Week 1 included a mandatory visit to what they called the Archives of Attempt. I called it the Hall of Participation Trophies, but again, trying to make friends here. The archives were basically a museum dedicated to everyone who'd failed to solve the Impossibility Chamber. And let me tell you, the galaxy had sent its best. There were holographic displays of attempts by beings I couldn't even pronounce the names of. Crystalline entities, hive minds, a guy who was apparently pure energy, but still couldn't crack the riddle. Each display included a dramatic reenactment of the failure, complete with somber music. It was like watching a compilation of people striking out at the World Series, except everyone was taking it way more seriously, and there were more tentacles involved. My classmates treated the tour like a religious pilgrimage. I got assigned to a squad with 3 other cadets, which in retrospect was probably some instructor's idea of a cosmic joke. There was Vexthor, my rhinoceros buddy, who approached everything with the emotional range of a granite block. He stood in front of each display taking notes in what looked like ancient warrior script. Pretty sure he was writing, "Failure is not an option," over and over. Then there was Quilba, a Nexian with approximately 17 tentacles and anxiety that could power a small city. She kept wringing her appendages together and whispering calculations under her breath. Every failure in the archives made her more nervous. By the end of the tour, she looked like she was about to have a panic attack that would require all 17 tentacles to properly express. The third member of our merry band was Rix, a Kaltorian who looked like someone had crossed a lizard with a calculator. He was apparently some kind of mathematical prodigy back on his homeworld, which he mentioned roughly every 5 minutes. Kid had an ego you could see from orbit. "Observe," Rick said, gesturing at a display showing some 8-dimensional being having a breakdown. This Archon of Kelvin attempted a pure mathematical approach, 47 hours of continuous calculation. The error was in his assumption that logic alone could transcend the puzzle's inherent paradoxes. "Huh," I said, reading the actual plaque. "Says here he mostly failed because he forgot to carry a 2. Rix's scales flushed purple. That is a gross oversimplification of a complex theoretical miscalculation. Right, but he still forgot to carry the 2. We did not bond during that tour. Commander Thulran met us at the end of the archives, standing in front of a massive door that I assumed led to the impossibility chamber itself. He swept his gaze across our group with the kind of judgment usually reserved for health inspections at truck stop bathrooms. "You stand before the greatest mystery in known space," he announced, like he was narrating a movie trailer. "For 300 cycles, this chamber has represented the boundary between mortal comprehension and cosmic truth. Only those who have achieved complete mental clarity, rigorous discipline, and total intellectual transcendence may even attempt to face what lies beyond this threshold." I raised my hand. "Is there a gift shop?" The silence that followed could have suffocated a small moon. Commander Thulran's mandibles quivered. "Cadet Morrison, do you comprehend the gravity of what you are being shown?" "Yeah, totally. Super serious. Very grave. Just wondering about the gift shop situation." Quilba made a sound like a tea kettle having an existential crisis. Vexthor looked like he wanted to challenge me to ritual combat. Rix was clearly calculating how much my presence was lowering the group's average IQ. Thulran clicked his mandibles, and what I was learning meant, "I am professionally required not to throw this cadet out an airlock." "The chamber," he continued with forced patience, "is not entertainment. It is a test of worthiness, a measurement of intellectual evolution. The riddle within has been analyzed by quantum computers, psychic collectives, and beings who exist partially outside normal spacetime. All have concluded it operates on principles beyond conventional understanding. So nobody's solved it because it's too weird? Because it is too advanced, Cadet Morrison. There is a distinction." I nodded like I understood, but honestly, the whole thing sounded like when my high school gave the algebra final a fancy name to make it seem harder. Call a pop quiz a spontaneous knowledge verification exercise, and suddenly everyone's stressed about it. The lecture continued for another hour. Something about respecting the sacred nature of intellectual pursuit, the proper mental preparation required, and a bunch of other stuff that boiled down to don't touch anything and be impressed. I might have dozed off around minute 45. The snoring gave me away. That became what Commander Thulran called a teaching moment about human inadequacy, and what I called the reason I had to write a 1,000-word essay on respect. Worth it for the nap, though. Week 3 brought preliminary testing. Apparently, before you could even think about approaching the impossibility chamber, you had to prove you could handle standard impossibilities. Their words, not mine. They sat us in a lecture hall that looked like someone had designed it specifically to make students feel inadequate. The ceiling was too high, the seats were too small, and everything echoed in a way that made you hyper-aware of every sound you made. I dropped my datapad once and it sounded like a bomb going off. The test appeared on our screens simultaneously, a series of logic puzzles, spatial reasoning challenges, and what I'm pretty sure were deliberately unsolvable paradoxes thrown in just to mess with us. Around me, cadets went into their preferred problem-solving modes. Rix immediately started scribbling equations in midair, using a holographic interface, numbers flying everywhere like some kind of mathematical fireworks show. Quilba extended all 17 tentacles and began manipulating multiple data streams at once, her eyes glazing over in concentration. Vexthor just stared at his screen with the intensity of someone trying to intimidate geometry into submission. I looked at the first problem. It was one of those three-dimensional chess while the board is on fire type scenarios. Move object A to position Z without violating rules 1 through 97. Here's the thing, though. Strip away all the fancy alien terminology and complicated setup, and it was basically that puzzle where you have to get a fox, a chicken, and a bag of grain across a river. I'd done that in elementary school. I moved the pieces around, eyeballed the solution, and hit submit. 45 seconds, done. Rix was still on problem 1 when I finished the entire test. He looked over at my screen, saw I was on the completion page, and his scales did this thing where they rippled with what I'm guessing was indignation. "Impossible," he hissed. "That test sequence requires a minimum of 4 hours for adequate analysis." "I don't know, man. Just kind of looked at it and moved stuff around until it worked." His left eye twitched. "That is not methodology. That is guessing." "Sure, if guessing means being right, then yeah, I guess I guessed." Commander Thulran appeared behind me like a judgmental ghost. He looked at my completed test, then at me, then back at the test. His mandibles did a little dance that I was pretty sure meant he was trying to find a way to disqualify me on a technicality. "Cadet Morrison, explain your process." "For which part?" "Any part. All parts. I want to understand how you claim to have completed a 4-hour examination in 11 minutes. I scrolled back through the problems. Okay, so the first one was the river crossing thing. Second one was basically Sudoku with extra steps. Third one looked complicated, but it was just pattern matching. Fourth one was a trick question. The answer was don't move anything. Fifth one, sufficient. Thulran cut me off, looking like he'd just bitten into a lemon. "Your results will be analyzed for accuracy." They were accurate. All of them. I know because Thulran brought it up in the next 3 staff meetings, according to Vexthor, who apparently has excellent hearing and no sense of discretion. This led to what I can only describe as an emergency lecture on proper academic reverence. Commander Thulran assembled our entire class in the ceremonial hall, which was decorated with banners from alien civilizations I'd never heard of and probably never would. "The pursuit of knowledge," he began, pacing in front of us like a disappointed parent, "is not a race. It is not a competition to see who can arrive at an answer most quickly. It is a journey of understanding, of appreciating the elegant complexity of advanced thought." I was trying to pay attention. Really, I was. But the hall was warm, I'd had a big lunch, and Thulran's voice had this droning quality that was basically a lullaby for the academically exhausted. My head dropped forward. Just for a second. Just a quick rest. Next thing I knew, Quilba was poking me with one of her tentacles and whispering urgently, Jake, Commander sees you." I jerked awake to find Thulran standing directly in front of me, vibrating with barely contained rage. "Cadet Morrison, has my lecture on the importance of respect bored you?" "No, sir. Just resting my eyes, sir." "Resting your eyes." "Very restfully, sir." Vexthor made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Even Rix looked vaguely amused, though he tried to hide it. Thulran's mandibles clacked together. "Write me an essay. 2,000 words. The importance of remaining conscious during instruction. Due tomorrow." "Can I write it while resting my eyes, sir?" That got me bumped up to 3,000 words and assigned cleaning duty in the combat training hall. Totally worth it. Week 6 brought the moment everyone had been building toward. We were going to observe the impossibility chamber. Not attempt it, mind you. Just observe. But from the way everyone was acting, you'd think we were about to witness the birth of a new universe. Cadet spent the entire morning preparing. Vexthor meditated for 2 hours in what he called warrior focus mode, which mostly looked like aggressive sitting. Quilba reviewed her notes so many times I'm pretty sure she had them memorized, down to the punctuation. Rix wore what he claimed was his formal calculation vest, which looked exactly like his regular vest, but apparently cost more. I showed up chewing gum. This was apparently a mistake. "Cadet Morrison, Commander Thulran said, his voice dripping with the kind of disappointment usually reserved for failed peace treaties. You will dispose of that immediately. The gum? It's just spearmint. The impossibility chamber is a sacred space of intellectual pursuit. You will not profane it with casual mastication. Profane seems like a strong word for chewing gum, sir. His compound eyes somehow managed to narrow despite being compound. Dispose of it, now. I stuck the gum behind my ear. Compromise. The chamber itself was behind approximately 17 security doors, each requiring a different authorization code. Thulran entered each one with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for nuclear launch sequences. The rest of the class followed in reverent silence. We finally entered a circular room that was honestly kind of underwhelming. White walls, soft lighting, and in the center a pedestal with what looked like a holographic puzzle floating above it. The puzzle was complex, sure, multi-dimensional shapes interlocking in ways that made my eyes hurt if I looked too long. But it wasn't glowing with cosmic energy or speaking in ancient tongues or anything. It was just a puzzle. Behold, Thulran whispered, because apparently we were whispering now. The impossibility itself. Everyone stared at it like it was going to spontaneously teach them the meaning of life. I stared at it like it was a really complicated Rubik's Cube, because it kind of was. Top cadets from each class will now attempt preliminary interface, Thulran announced. Rix of Kaltoria, you may approach. Rix practically glided to the pedestal, scales shimmering with confidence. He studied the puzzle from every angle, his eyes darting through calculations. Then he reached out and tried to manipulate one of the shapes. The puzzle made a sound like a game show buzzer. A holographic display appeared. Attempt failed. Logical foundation error. Rick stood there for a solid minute, scales gradually turning from confident purple to embarrassed gray. I don't understand. My calculations were perfect. Next, Thulran said, not unkindly. Vexthor of Peltheria. Vexthor approached like he was going into battle. He circled the puzzle 3 times, studying it with intense focus. Then he tried to solve it through what I can only describe as aggressive determination. He manipulated shapes with the kind of force usually reserved for breaking down doors. Same buzzer. Attempt failed. Approach lacks nuance. Even the puzzle was judging him. This continued for the next hour. Various cadets tried different approaches. Mathematical, philosophical, intuitive, spiritual. One cadet tried to negotiate with the puzzle. Another attempted to solve it by humming what he claimed was the frequency of understanding. Every single one failed. Quilba had a complete nervous breakdown when it was her turn. She got 3 tentacles tangled trying to manipulate multiple parts at once and had to be gently extracted by 2 teaching assistants. Finally, because apparently the universe has a sense of humor, Thulran looked at me. I suppose, he said, with the enthusiasm of someone volunteering for a root canal, we should allow the human to make his inevitable failure part of the educational experience. I unstuck the gum from behind my ear and popped it back in my mouth. Sure, I'll give it a shot. The collective gasp from the class was almost worth the dirty looks. I walked up to the pedestal, still chewing. The puzzle rotated slowly, all these interlocking 3-dimensional shapes that were simultaneously there and not there. Each shape had symbols on it, equations, patterns. Very impressive, very mysterious, also very familiar. Because here's what nobody in this room seemed to get. The puzzle wasn't complicated because it was advanced. It was complicated because someone had made it complicated. Strip away all the fancy holographic presentation and the 300-year legacy of failure, and you had a basic problem that had been over-engineered into oblivion. I reached out and grabbed one of the shapes. The room held its breath, which was impressive since like half these aliens didn't breathe oxygen. I twisted it 45 degrees. Nothing exploded. Good start. Okay, so here's where it gets good. I'm standing there looking at this puzzle that supposedly stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy for 3 centuries, and all I can think is that it reminds me of the time my dad's garage door opener broke, and he spent 6 hours reading the manual before I fixed it by unplugging it and plugging it back in. The shapes were floating in this complex 3-dimensional arrangement, covered in alien symbols and mathematical equations. Very intimidating, very mysterious. Except I wasn't looking at the symbols. I was looking at the spaces between the shapes. Cadet Morrison, Commander Thulran said, his voice tight with what I assume was either anticipation or the hope that I was about to embarrass humanity on a galactic scale. Perhaps you would like to share your analytical process? Yeah, so this is basically like a video game puzzle, right? The kind where they make it look super complicated, but there's actually a pattern. The silence in the room was deafening. A video game, Rix repeated, his voice flat. You are comparing the impossibility chamber to a recreational simulation. I mean, kind of, look. I pointed at one of the shapes. This piece here, everyone's been trying to move it based on the equations on its surface. But the equations don't matter. They're a distraction. What matters is how the shadow it casts interacts with the other shapes. Quilba made a sound like a deflating balloon. Shadows? Yeah. See, you've got all these three-dimensional objects, but they're being projected in a way that creates two-dimensional patterns. Everyone's been trying to solve it in 3 dimensions, but the actual answer is in 2 dimensions. It's like, I don't know, origami in reverse. I started moving shapes. Not based on their equations or their positions or any of the stuff everyone had been focusing on, just based on how their shadows lined up. Commander Thulran moved closer, his mandibles clicking in what might have been confusion. That is not a recognized problem-solving methodology. Sure it is. It's called not overthinking things. I twisted another shape. My dad used to say that humans spent like 50,000 years figuring stuff out with duct tape and good vibes. We didn't have fancy computers or psychic powers or whatever. We just had pattern recognition and the willingness to try stupid stuff to see what happened. Another shape clicked into place. The puzzle made a sound that definitely wasn't the failure buzzer. Impossible, Vexthor breathed. See, that's your problem right there. You all keep calling it impossible, so you approach it like it's impossible. But nothing's really impossible. It's just hard until you figure out the trick. I was on a roll now. The shapes were moving like they wanted to be moved, falling into place with satisfying little clicks. The pattern was becoming clearer. It wasn't some cosmic mystery. It was just a really well-designed lock, and I'd spent my entire teenage years getting past locks that weren't supposed to be gotten past. This piece here, I said, moving one of the larger shapes. Everyone's been treating it like it's the key to everything because it's the biggest. But it's not the key. It's the thing that holds everything else closed. Move it last, not first. Rix's scales were doing color things I'm pretty sure weren't healthy. But the mathematical progression indicates... The mathematical progression is lying to you, dude. It's a fake-out, like a pump fake in basketball. I do not know what basketball is. Sport where you throw a ball into a hoop. Very simple. Kinda like this puzzle, actually. 3 more shapes. 2 more. 1 more. The final piece slid into place with a sound like a satisfied sigh. For a moment, nothing happened. I was starting to think maybe I'd screwed it up after all, and I was going to have to write another essay about respect or whatever. Then the puzzle glowed. Not the mysterious cosmic glow everyone had probably been hoping for. Just a simple green light that in any language means success. The pedestal made a cheerful beeping sound. A door that I swear hadn't been there before opened in the wall, and every alarm in the entire academy started going off at once. Commander Thulran stood frozen, his mandibles hanging open in what I'm pretty sure was the xiphoid equivalent of a complete mental shutdown. Quilba had all 17 tentacles covering her eyes. Vexthor looked like he'd just witnessed a violation of the natural order. Rix collapsed, just straight up fainted. I took the gum out of my mouth. So is that it? Did I win? Thulran's voice came out as a wheeze. You solved it. Yeah, I kind of figured from the glowing and the door and stuff. You solved the impossibility chamber in 9 minutes and 43 seconds while chewing gum. Spearmint gum. Important detail. He just stared at me. Through me, really. Like he was seeing the end of everything he'd ever believed in. Outside, I could hear running footsteps, shouted commands in 17 different languages, and what sounded like someone having a panic attack over the intercom system. Huh, I said, looking at the open door. Should probably see what's in there, right? Thulron made a sound like a computer crashing. This was either going to be really good or really bad for humanity's reputation. Possibly both. The next 72 hours were what I can only describe as organized chaos on a galactic scale. Word spread fast when you solve something that's been unsolved for 300 years, especially when you solve it while chewing gum and making sports analogies. The Academy went into what they called verification protocol, which apparently meant locking down everything while they made absolutely sure I hadn't cheated somehow. They checked me for hidden technology. They ran cognitive scans. They had Thulron recreate the puzzle 3 times to make sure I couldn't do it again. I solved it 3 more times, faster each time. By the 3rd attempt, I had it down to 6 minutes. Meanwhile, the galactic academic community was having what humans would call a collective meltdown. Professors who'd dedicated their entire lives to studying the impossibility chamber were suddenly faced with the reality that the answer was just, look at the shadows and don't overthink it. Papers were being retracted. Theories were being rewritten. One prominent Kaltorian mathematician published a response that was literally just the word no repeated for 40 pages. My classmates didn't know how to handle it. Vexthor kept looking at me like I was a bomb that might explode. Quilba oscillated between admiration and existential dread. Rix avoided me entirely, which was probably for the best, since his ego had taken a beating that would require years of therapy to recover from. The actual solution room behind that door turned out to be pretty anticlimactic. Just a small chamber with a plaque that said, "Congratulations on not overthinking it," in 12 languages. Someone 300 years ago had designed this whole thing as a test of pragmatic thinking versus theoretical obsession, and the galaxy had been failing it ever since. Commander Thulron requested a formal meeting 1 week after what everyone was now calling the incident. I showed up to his office expecting another essay assignment. Instead, he just looked at me for a long moment, his mandibles doing a little dance that I'd learned meant he was experiencing complex emotions. "Cadet Morrison," he finally said, "I have been an instructor at this academy for 73 cycles. I have trained thousands of cadets from hundreds of species. I have seen genius, dedication, and intellectual achievement that would astound your homeworld. Sir, if this is building to you calling me an idiot, I've already got that covered." His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "No. I am attempting to express that I was wrong about humanity. Your approach to problems is not primitive. It is not unsophisticated. It is simply different. You see solutions where we see complexity. You find patterns where we find chaos. So I'm not on probation anymore? You are being accelerated to advanced classes, along with a formal commendation, and a request from 3 different research institutions to explain your methodology. The methodology is just don't be scared of looking stupid. Yes, precisely. Something the rest of the galaxy apparently forgot." He stood up, which I'd learned was a sign of formal respect. "The Academy owes humanity an apology. You have proven that sometimes the most advanced solution is the simplest one, that wisdom and intelligence are not the same thing, and that spearmint gum, while still inappropriate in sacred spaces, is not in fact the sign of intellectual deficiency." I grinned. "Does this mean I can skip the essay on proper respect? You still have to write it, but it can be shorter." Fair enough. Word got back to Earth pretty quick. My mom called through the quantum communication channel to tell me I was all over the news, and that she was very proud, and please stop chewing gum in formal settings because it was giving her anxiety. Humanity's status in the galactic community got a significant upgrade. Turns out solving a 300-year-old riddle in under 10 minutes buys you a lot of credibility. We went from probationary members to species of interest overnight. Probably helped that I explained the solution in the most human way possible, complete with basketball analogies and references to my dad's garage. The Academy had to completely restructure its approach to the impossibility chamber. They couldn't keep calling it impossible, now that a first-year cadet had solved it with pattern recognition and casual confidence. They renamed it the Pragmatism Challenge and made it part of the standard curriculum. I heard they added a little plaque next to it that said, "Sometimes the answer is simpler than you think." In 17 languages. My life at the Academy got significantly easier after that. Professors stopped treating me like a potential embarrassment and started treating me like a legitimate student. Other cadets stopped looking at me like I was going to accidentally start an intergalactic incident. I even got invited to a few study groups, though I suspect that was partly because people wanted to understand how a human brain worked. The funny part? I'd already moved on to the next thing. The Academy had this advanced combat simulation that supposedly nobody had beaten in its hardest mode. Word was it required perfect coordination, strategic genius, and years of tactical training. I figured I'd give it a shot next week, maybe bring some snacks. Thulran saw me eyeing the simulation room and his mandibles did that clicking thing again. Cadet Morrison, please tell me you are not considering the Gauntlet of Champions. Is that what it's called? Sounds intense. It is designed to be unbeatable, a test of absolute limits. Sure, but people keep saying things are unbeatable right before I beat them. So maybe it's just really hard. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been the xiphoid equivalent of accepting the inevitable. The simulation room is available on Tuesdays. Awesome. Thanks, Commander. As I walked away, I heard him mutter something in his native language. Vexthor later told me it translated roughly to, "The humans are going to ruin everything we thought we knew, and somehow we are okay with this." Pretty accurate, honestly. Here's the thing about being human in a galaxy full of species who've been doing this space civilization thing way longer than we have. We don't have the fancy technology, the psychic powers, or the 1,000-year-old wisdom. What we have is tens of thousands of years of looking at problems and saying, well, that's dumb, let me try this other thing. We're not smarter, we're just less afraid of looking stupid while we figure stuff out. And sometimes, apparently, that's exactly what the universe needs. Someone who'll walk up to an ancient cosmic mystery, pop some gum in their mouth, and treat it like a puzzle in a cereal box. The galaxy's still adjusting to having humans around. I figure we'll either revolutionize everything or accidentally break something important. Possibly both. But hey, at least we'll have fun doing it.